So then, what is the evidence that mankind could have lived a long time in the past? It's not like we can just go to some ancient human and find an ID in their grave and say, oh look, Noah was 900 years old. So we have to look at the genome of both modern and ancient man to resolve this question. Let's begin with, what is aging? Why do we inevitably die from old age? Well, there's two major factors that contribute to this: genetics and overall DNA damage and loss. We used to think that genetics only played a very small role, if any factor at all, in determining how long we lived. The numbers changed all the time. We know better now, and the more we learn, the more we see that number grow. Another contributing factor is that of DNA loss. You see, every cellular replication that happens, we lose bits of DNA. Picture this happening like opening a zipper. The metal or plastic teeth along the edges of the zipper represent DNA. As we age, the zipper opens more and more. Thus, the more DNA is lost till eventually too much has occurred and the damage is done and we die. This is called the Hayflick limit. When cells divide, that genetic material needs to be copied. This is called DNA replication. Unfortunately, every replication doesn't bring the full DNA sequence with it, and after 40 to 60 cellular replications today, people die because just too much DNA loss has occurred. So, if we're losing bits of DNA every replication, and then we die when we lose too much, then logic tells us that if we had more DNA in the past, then we could live longer, since more DNA could be lost before too much damage has occurred, killing us. Think of your genome like glass. Now think of DNA damage like a crack in that glass. A crack in a small window is catastrophic, but that same size crack on a larger window doesn't cause nearly as much damage, and is not as bad overall. So, if our ancient patriarchal ancestors had more DNA than us today, then it would validate that they would have the biological potential to live much longer. What do we see? Exactly that. They had not just a little more, they had a lot more. Nearly an entire chromosome worth more. That's right, they had so much more DNA that it amounts to nearly the size of the entire Y chromosome. Imagine how much more damage the genome could handle with so much more DNA. That's a lot of buffer. Now, we know that a lot of animals, aquatic life and reptiles, never stop growing until they die. So therefore, the larger the shark or reptile, the longer it lived. So if they lived longer in the past, and we know ancient man ate these things, then why is it impossible for us to think that man also did not live longer in the past, since they lived at the same time? We know that man lived alongside of these creatures because we found evidence of tool markings on the very bones that came from them scraping meat from these creatures, and then they made jewelry out of them. We have evidence that they ate giant cave bears and sea tortoise and the now extinct auroch. They ate giant deer, giant sloth, and even giant cows, including sharks and dolphins. And we have evidence a giant bird ate a Neanderthal child. Clearly, they all lived together. So, we have humans living at the same time when all of these other long-living creatures were. Yet, for some reason, we're told to believe that man alone was immune to these biological effects of a longer life that all of these other life forms seem to take advantage of. That makes no sense. Geneticists who work exclusively on aging all agree that we can live much longer in the future through genetic manipulation. One of the leading aging researchers, Dr. Aubrey de Grey, has said that humans, with the aid of gene editing via the removal of mutations, should be able to live for 1,000 years.
Doctor, can you talk about the impact of regenerative medicine and what would that have on longevity? What are we talking about in the big picture, not only on length of years, but on quality of life as well?
Sure. We do not know at this point how long people will live when they receive the therapies that we're working on at the moment, and that I think we have a good chance of developing within the next couple of decades. What we do know, however, is that any longevity benefits that might accrue from these therapies will be a side effect of health.
You've said that you think there's a good chance there's a person alive today that might live to be 1,000?
I think it's possible that we could see really extraordinary lifespans. We could even see people living as long as 1,000 years.
That's hard for people to grasp, I think, when you talk about the life expectancy now.
It is hard for people to grasp, and that's why I say, listen, just don't be distracted by it. It is just a distraction. What matters is staying healthy now, staying healthy in 20 or 30 or 40 years. Forget about how long you're going to live. It's not relevant.
So, if genetically we can get there by using technology to essentially revert our genome back to a mutation-free state, then why is it impossible to think that our ancestors who were more mutation-free didn't live as long as modern-day geneticists are saying that we should live to be? I mean, isn't it a pretty big coincidence that secular science just so happens to throw out the biblical patriarch ages of longevity as our genetic potential? The patriarchal drive study shows that after 10 generations from the flood, Abraham was already dead from old age at 175. That's down from 950 years old in just 10 generations. Jacob, 4 generations later, died at 145. And by the time of Moses, 7 generations after him, we have a 120-year maximum lifespan plateau. So the drop from maximum lifespan to a plateau of 120 was rapid, about 20 generations in all. Not only does the 2012 study show that the father's age contributes the most mutational load to the offspring, which Noah would have passed on the most in history, affecting all of humanity alive today, but we also see the same results in experiments today, and they are identical to what patriarchal drive discovered. We see this in inbreeding experiments. The same biological decay curve happens in birds, rodents, dogs, and fish. So if we see these same results in animal experiments and simulations that essentially are the same as the theme in the Bible and the story of Noah, then why is it impossible to think that this could not be the case? Of course it would be. And the predictive power of the biological decay curve in patriarchal drive is spot on. They even admit that something happened around 5,000 years ago that caused harmful mutations to arise out of nowhere and then explode in the human population. Our world in the past was very different going back in time. There was more magnetism, double atmospheric pressure and oxygen. All of these things are conducive to a longer lifespan. It is obvious that man lived longer in the past, and his true potential was somewhere nearing 1,000. Let's go over them. 1. Genetics is the major cause for aging, and we inherited a genetic burden through Noah and his extreme age, topped with inbreeding. Animal studies and patriarchal drive by John Sanford and Dr. Robert Carter validate this correlation and show an identical biological decay curve that we would expect to see if the biblical story of Noah was true and the ages in Scripture were a fact. So, if the evidence corresponds to what Scripture says, why not believe that it was true? The predictive power of patriarchal drive shows us what happens when extremely aged fathers do have offsprings, what the results would be. They line up perfectly with what we would expect to see if a human who was 500 years old had children. And the statistical probability of this lining up with the biological decay curve is beyond coincidence. We now have learned that mutations are passed on based on the father's age, and the older they are, the more mutations are passed down, on and on. And it just so happens to line up perfectly with what Scripture tells us about Noah and his age when he had his children, and the genetic mutational load he placed on them, which would have reduced not only their lifespan, but all future generations, if Noah was truly that old when he was a father. If all of these are not true, then why? Number 2, a larger genome in humans allows for more damage to occur, and we now have evidence that we had much larger genomes in the past, which logically concludes that we could have lived much longer from this alone. If not, why not? 3. Other cultures mention a time called the Golden Age. It's quite peculiar that civilizations that supposedly never met all decided to come up with this idea that humanity lived to extreme ages in the past. Why would they all invent the exact same ridiculous idea? 4. We have clear evidence that telomeres get shorter every generation, yet the decay rate stays the same, which validates that people had the potential to live much longer in the past just from having more padding protecting the ends of the chromosomes. The logical conclusion with this evidence would be that this allowed people to live longer. If not, why? 5. We literally have genealogies that go back to Noah from different places in the world. These are not biblical genealogies. These are outside lineages of unbroken chains of royalty going all the way back to Noah from different places in the world. Clearly, these were real people. If they were not, when did they stop being real people and turn into myth? Number 6. In the past, we find more oxygen, more pressure, more magnetism. All have been documented and shown to extend lifespan. So if all of these conditions were met in the past, why could man not have lived longer just from these aspects alone? 7. Aging is related to genetics. There is no doubt about this. Since it is genetic, then genetics gives us an answer to the riddle of human lifespan. If aging is related to mutations, then we can predict that removing mutations is better for us, and we would live longer. We see this is true in multiple studies. And now we have entire laboratories dedicated to human longevity, like the Sense Foundation, Unity, I-Corps, the Methuselah Foundation, and the Longevity Science Foundation, and many more. Our model answers this paradox of human aging, but evolution has many theories trying to solve this riddle and explain the discrepancy. That is why it is a paradox for them, because it makes no sense evolutionarily. Number 12. Mutation rates are too fast for humanity to be very old. In our model, this is easily explained from Noah, and we can see that these mutation rates and both SNVs and harmful mutations are rising at this time. Number 8. We know mutations are building up and up and up, compiling with no way for the body to get rid of them. There are many names in biology for this, but this mutation accumulation problem has led geneticists to question how humanity could have ever lived as long as it has. How could these mutations, which are lowering fitness, adding disease to the population, and overall harming the system, not be evidence of a longer lifespan going backwards in time? We know mutation accumulation is a real problem, but here's the dead giveaway that it is true. The Human Genetic Mutation Database alone tells us this. Selection is not stopping nor having any effect on this, and beneficial mutations are nowhere to be found to help. What do we see? Genetic degradation and mutation accumulation. And top that with the fact that the average person is missing over 100 genes. How can evolution try to tell us one thing when we're seeing the exact opposite? And if this is what we see, why wouldn't ancient man with less mutation saturation overall not live as long? 9. Removing mutations from just a single gene in mice allowed them to live 23% longer, and they admit that the same should roll over into humans. Now think about this. If they removed mutations from just those 20 longevity genes, that's an increase of lifespan over 460%, or 672 years of age. All we actually need to do is remove them from 25 genes, and we now have the potential to live for 1,000 years. This is a 787% increase in lifespan. And this evidence is more proof that an ancestral genome with less mutations was far superior than ours today. If not, why is this evidence wrong? Why are the geneticists wrong? Number 10. Fitness is going down over time. This means logically that going back in time, fitness was greater. The more fitness, we know the more likely an individual is able to survive and live longer to reproduce. So I believe people saying that, oh, we don't live long today, so we couldn't in the past, is just like saying, well, creatures today don't live long, so there's no way they were living longer in the past either. Well, of course they were, and we know they were. So the same conclusions we can deduce with humans. Number 11. Inbreeding reduces lifespan, and inbreeding studies follow the same biological decay curve as to what we see when we look at Noah's offspring. Number 12. Humans do not speciate, so we have no way of helping buffer additional mutations added to our genome. There is no way natural selection can save us. Only gene editing can resolve our future extinction. What gene editing does is erase mutations. Since mutations are leading to shorter lifespan, less fitness, and more disease, then we know that removing them is imperative to overall better health and lifespan. If mutations were not a problem for aging and disease, then geneticists would not be trying so hard to figure out how to remove them to extend human life and rid disease. Yet they are. Why is that? Number 13. Another line of evidence that people could have lived longer is that Scripture tells us that the pre-flood people ate a plant-based diet. Meat was condoned only after the flood, and we know today that cooking meat ages the body greatly. It adds carcinogens and what's known as advanced glycotic end products, and the acronym for it is AGE, because it ages us rapidly. So again, logically we can conclude that if people today are eating things that are aging them more rapidly, but our ancient ancestors didn't eat those things, they probably lived longer. If not, why? Number 14. We have discovered that the younger somebody is when they reach puberty, the faster they will age. Since puberty determines how long we will live, and then we find that early man aged extremely slow as children in comparison to today, then that means their upper age limit is also increased. Logic tells us then that if early man was not reaching puberty till late in life, it means they biologically age slower as adults, looking at the fossils themselves. 15. Our leading geneticists on biological aging all agree that man could live to 1,000 if we remove mutations through gene editing software. Why are they wrong when all of the evidence and actual repeated studies have shown us that we are headed in that direction, and that they are correct in this prediction? And why does it happen to just line up so coincidentally with the Bible?